Hello, strangers. But it's funny, because you look kind of familiar. Don't you just love this time of year? In keeping with the season, this is story number 105.
When we put down preferred duty stations, I recalled my recruiter telling me that, with the Air Force, I could see the world. I chose places overseas, areas I'd never been, only to end up in the same state, towns over, from where I'd grown up. My unit was stationed in a lot of old brick buildings that were still in use despite some significantly concerning damage and age. They always smelled damp, and mopping the floors with that green stuff only served to add a distinct chemical green ambiance over the top. Yeah, they were old and musty, but we used what we had, and we used it a lot. The ops tempo of our squadron was a 24/7 deal. Only in the summers. That's when the weather meant night ops could happen without risking hypothermia. But 24/7 ops means a couple of these old buildings had to be manned 24/7. And as newly arrived and thus lowest ranking, that meant us new bucks were in heavy rotation. But it wasn't too bad. I'm a night owl, so staying up for the midnight shift, it didn't bother me at all. It was chill, as long as I didn't fall asleep and stayed good on all the computer-based trainings. No one seemed to care or mind much what I did. I could read, even watch some videos on my phone, just so long as the light in the little front office was on and the door unlocked for the occasional group to come in from the field, returning their gear before heading home. It was on one of those nights that the whole thing started. I'd been in place for hours, and the one dingy CCTV camera that showed the front entrance had shown only moths as long as I'd been sitting at the desk. I'd powered through a few energy drinks by this point and felt the call of nature, so I heeded it. I headed out of my office, the front entrance at my left casting a filmy block of weak light on the linoleum floor. To the right was the main hallway, and down that hallway were the facilities, so that's the direction I turned, and stopped short immediately, because that hallway wasn't empty. Walking down the hallway, his back to me, was a man. I near jumped out of my skin. Whatever sound of surprise in me locked instantly in my throat, before I relaxed a bit. He wasn't too far down the hallway, and the light from random offices and exit lights gave me enough of a picture to see he was normal, average-sized, hair in rags. Not some random homeless man, which I'd heard happened some time before I'd arrived on base. And he was in uniform, so... Wait. It hit me. Where'd he come from? I looked back to the front entrance as though I'd see the glass doors still swinging shut. Obviously, they were closed, as they had been closed all night through that bleary CCTV. I looked back down the hall to the man. I don't know how long I stood there. It was like I was afraid to move for a bit. But I eventually broke out of whatever freeze I'd been in and stepped back into the safety of the overhead lights of the office. I went back to the desk. I peered at the CCTV for a while, trying to figure it out. We only had the one entrance open to the building. That was all they cared to man overnight. Figuring that eventually the man would have to come back the same way, and I'd get a better look then, I settled back, completely forgetting I had to pee, until 5 a.m. the next morning, when the early birds began to arrive. All of them were in standard BDUs or blues. I thought about logging it, I did, but I had this worry. If I logged it, then I'd have to explain it. I'd have to explain how the man had got past me in the first place. I'd be called into question about if I'd been paying attention, if I'd slept. That sort of trouble I like to avoid. So I didn't. When I was relieved at 8 a.m., I simply took my things, pulled on my cover, and went home, determined to put it out of my head. Which I did, until that night. I was working the night shift the whole week, and that was only Tuesday. Wednesday night, I was back in the seat again. You better believe I had my eyes trained on that CCTV. That or the dark doorway that showed a slice of the hallway from the desk. I didn't watch any videos that night. I stayed away from energy drinks too. You'd think that would have given me a headache, but I had a stomach ache that wouldn't quit, that took up all my attention. And nothing happened. Not that night, or Thursday night, or Friday night. By the following Monday, I'd just shrugged it off as a one-off. Maybe somebody had forgotten their keys, or worked late. I'd missed them somehow. Clearly there was nothing to worry about. I felt pretty good about my decision not to log it, even forgot about it as the nights passed through another week. The following Monday, I wasn't even peeking out of the office anymore. I was just walking on out to head to the bathroom. So when I came out of the office and turned right, the shock of seeing the man, same hair, uniform, walk. I jumped back, then stuck my head out and looked again. I saw his steady cadence as he passed another light. I readied my voice to call out in something that sounded like I was in charge, hopefully not something that sounded like I'd near wet myself. But the lump in my throat wouldn't move. While the light showed me enough detail to see the same cut as my own BDUs, the uniform he wore was different. It was solid olive drab green, but it was cut like BDUs, a blouse and top. See, we did have some solid green uniforms. Some of the people attached to my sister squadron were aircrew, and they wore a uniform all one green color too. But those were flight suits, one piece with a zipper in the front. This was clearly something else. Something old-looking. I glanced to the front entrance to my left. I didn't want to take my eyes off of him, but I did. I dreaded looking away, but I had an idea I dreaded more. That if I looked too long after him, that the man would turn around, and something deep, dark in my aching gut told me that was not something I wanted to happen. Something smoky and awful told me if he did turn, if we made eye contact. I'm shivering even retelling this. And of course, once I tore my eyes away from the closed front doors, the doors that had stayed closed all night long, he was gone. But this time, he didn't stay gone. I figured out my little ritual for it as the weeks followed. If I had to go to the bathroom, leave the safety of the yellow office light for any reason, I would first train my eyes on the CCTV. Then, coming out of the office, I would look immediately left to the doors, confirm they were shut still. Good doors, stay. Then I could turn right. And when I performed this little routine, the man didn't appear. He stayed in my thoughts though. God, I was plagued by him. Night shift went from being chill to being tense, just waiting, letting that little doubt that my routine I clung to was just coincidence, that he'd change it up, come striding into the office at any moment, play games with me. To the point where I finally broke down and asked one of my fellow airmen about it, another senior airman called Stevenson. I didn't want to. I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. But Stevenson didn't think I was crazy. He didn't even give me time to worry about it or try to walk it back. The second I said, "Hey, you ever worked night shift before? Building 9. He interrupted me. "The guy in the pickle suit, yeah?" I asked him what that meant. For a moment I pictured a man wearing a giant pickle suit, like a mascot. Stevenson clarified that no, a pickle suit was what his dad called it. His dad had been Air Force during Vietnam, some 40 years before, and back then, the uniforms were indeed BDU blouse and pants cut, full olive drab green, green all over like a pickle, hence pickle suit. I almost yelled at him. The sartorial lesson aside, I wanted to know about the man I was seeing at night. The man always heading somewhere with a sense of urgency, but who seemed to come from nowhere. How I only ever saw his back. How I knew deep down, seeing his face would be the end of me. Stevenson did not calm my worry. It was worse. He agreed. He proceeded to tell me what had been passed from airman to airman in Building 9, particularly those who worked nights. See, our squadron building hadn't always been in our squadron's possession. It, like our sister squadron down the road, had been an air wing squadron. In that time, they had installed in that same hallway a little glass display case. In that glass display case was a hunk of metal, melted and blobby, with darker chunks of more metal, I'd always guessed, sticking out in haphazard places. The display case was still in the hallway, and Stevenson told me that that metal had come from an infamous in-flight emergency that had taken down a jet. It had been bad. I mean, when you look at a fire extinguisher or take one of those mind-numbing CBTs about fire extinguishers, you learn about the types of fire. One of them is metal fire, for which few extinguishers will do anything at all. And on an airplane, metal in the sky, metal fire is a sign something's gone very, very wrong. In this case, it had claimed the lives of 4, all 4 aboard. Stevenson told me that the chunk in question was rumored to have been recovered from the co-pilot's seat, and the co-pilot, it had been his first flight. Imagine that, killed during a training, his first ever. Some luck. I said as much to Stevenson, and he agreed with the sentiment, except instead of luck, he said curse. The man that I saw, that many other airmen had seen before me, was that very co-pilot, doing what we can all imagine he'd wanted to do, walk away from it, down to the rooms they debriefed in, so he could finally head home. While that sounded almost logical, I mean as logical as a dead man walking down a squadron hallway could sound, it didn't give me comfort. I was giggling, nervous energy when I asked about my premonition. I asked Stevenson if the co-pilot was just trying to go home, then he wouldn't be dangerous, right? Stevenson told me, oh no, he's dangerous because he was jealous. I was alive and he's dead. I get to go home. He never will. And if I let him see me, well, he cut it there. He didn't need to say the rest, because my own gut thudded, confirmed it. If he saw me, alive and breathing when he wasn't, he'd steal my breath, the same way the whoosh of flames on the plane had stolen his. I was floored. I asked Stevenson what we were supposed to do. Why hadn't I been told? Just a rush of questions because I was terrified standing there in the smoke pit, knowing that in one short hour, my shift back at that cursed desk would begin again. Stevenson sighed. He lit another cigarette off the cherry in his first. He told me that I needed to keep my ass out of that hallway, especially after 2 a.m. when the flight had been scheduled to land. If I had to leave the desk, had to because I couldn't do the water bottle trick with my anatomy, that I needed to look to the door first, then down the hall, never at the display case. And if I had happened to go to the bathroom and leave it and have the man walking towards me between me and the office, to turn around and go back into the bathroom, eyes to the ground, and wait for him to pass. Stevenson told me he always did pass, but then added, well, he passes the men's room. The ladies' bathroom had been a late addition and was placed farther down the hallway. Stevenson shrugged. Well, he passes the men's, he repeated. Did you know girls on aircrew wear the same flight suits? One zipper, only in the front, and fly jets that don't have sit-down toilets. Well, they use something called a piddle pack. It comes with a cup. I got good at using it over the next month until summer finally ended. I never went into that hallway, never left the office during a night shift again. That was a year and a PCS ago. I'm at a different base now, one with no active flight crews, but I still have my friends back at my first duty station. I recently got a text from one of them about the latest goss, and what should come up but Building 9. There was some big base transformation effort happening, and they'd sent in crews of, what else, more junior enlisted to begin the teardown. And those airmen promptly scuttled back out. When they'd pulled down the cube walls and the drop ceilings, the amount of thick, redolent mold sent visible spores misting through the air. The whole building was plagued with black mold. It was bearded in it, showing that it had been there for a really long time, and definitely had been in there when I'd been sitting the desk on night shift. I texted Stevenson the news. He too had moved on to a different unit, and I asked him if he thought maybe the whole thing we could chalk up to a hallucination. We'd sat there breathing in mold spores overnight, after all, week after week. That's meant to be terrible for you. That plus the usual hallmarks, too much caffeine, nicotine, what have you. I asked Stevenson, was it possible we'd all just imagined it? But Stevenson's text was just 2 words. Pickle suit. That's all he needed to say. If it was a hallucination, why, without discussing it first, had we all hallucinated the exact same man? I may be a night owl at heart, but nowadays I go to bed at a reasonable hour, and I never volunteer for night shift.
That is a thing, you know, when you first get to your duty station. They used to call it casuals. You ended up doing chores, waiting for classes to start if you were still in tech school, or for you to join whatever squadron and ops tempo they had. It wasn't all bad, but anytime a DV came along, you'd find yourself on some inane duty like sweeping the gravel. But there were plenty of times that we'd find some place to just chill, and that's really where a lot of these stories come from. So consider this a sort of initiation. You and I sitting in a shed, surrounded by various cleaning and lawn maintenance tools. We're drinking ribbits that are a little too warm to be good, and we're just passing the time, shooting the shit until it's time to go home. If you'd like to reach out, email and socials are in the description. Interacting with the like, comment, and subscribe features does something, allegedly. And otherwise, we'll meet again next Tuesday. stay strange, stay safe, and take care, strangers.